Hey everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Mary from therosehomestead.com, and in today's video, I'm going to share with you 5 myths that I had about sourdough years ago, and I've busted them all, and I want to share them with you in case you're maybe stuck in a rut with your sourdough, so stay tuned. Alright, before we get started, if you're new here, I make 2 new videos every single week on Monday and Thursday on cooking from scratch, gardening, food preservation, and homesteading. If that sounds interesting to you, I would really appreciate it if you would consider hitting that subscribe button down below. I'd really appreciate it. It helps the channel out a lot. So let's get to this list. This was my personal list. When I first started sourdough, I was watching all of these videos and reading all this stuff, and it really was overwhelming. It was so complicated. And after doing it for years and years, I realized it's so simple. You don't have to do all this stuff. So you can do it if you want to, but you don't have to. So I've got a list here, so you'll see me looking over here because I don't want to mess up anything. Okay, so the first myth that I had to bust was that you need to weigh your flour and water when you feed your starter. Well, first of all, I didn't have a kitchen scale when I first started my sourdough starter, so I was like, well, what am I supposed to do? And, I was just kind of confused, and that was the first one. I was like, I'm just going to see what happens, and I just put a quarter cup of flour, a quarter cup of water, and I kind of made up my own way of doing a sourdough starter because the way that I had watched and the way that it had been explained to me, it was kind of technical, and I thought, well, if it works, it works. If not, I'm not going to buy special equipment, to do this. I was brand new. Didn't even know if I would stick with sourdough. But it worked. And my sourdough is so active, is so vigorous. I have no problems with my sourdough starter. And I have never weighed my feedings. I don't even really measure perfectly. I just put some flour and enough water to get it to the consistency that I want. The only thing I will say is don't feed your starter less than what is in the starter jar. So if you have a half a cup of starter, you want to feed it at least a cup of flour and a cup of water so that starter has a lot to feed on. That's it. That's as far as I go with that. All right, myth number 2. You should not use different flours with your starter. So say you started it with unbleached all-purpose. Well, you can't change it to whole wheat flour. This is what I watched in videos and I read online, and I'm here to say that is not true. I have used unbleached all-purpose, einkorn, kamut, freshly ground whole wheat, store-bought whole wheat, spelt, and it is always fine. You don't have to be concerned. The only 3 flours I will not feed my starter is bleached, because bleach obviously isn't good for your starter, and self-rising flour, that's not good to feed your starter, and gluten-free flours, because I don't have a gluten-free starter. Now, if I had a gluten-free starter, I would use gluten-free flours, but that is myth number 2. Now, myth number 3 was by accident that I busted the myth. From all the videos I watched and all the stuff I read, that says, well, you need to feed your starter over and over to lead up to the crescendo of baking a loaf of bread. And I was like, wow, that is so wasteful. If it's active, it's active. And this was just me, thinking I've got to figure out a better way, because who plans that far ahead? I don't. I never plan that far ahead. So for me, I was like, listen, I'm going to feed the starter. Once it starts bubbling and it's rising in the jar, I'm going to use it. And it worked fine. I make beautiful loaves of bread, and I've never had a problem with it. So, like I said, you can do it if you want to, but I am a busy person. I do not have time. I would have to have like a calendar set up. Okay, start feeding the starter here, get ready here. It doesn't fit into my schedule. And I'm telling you, you don't have to do it. I promise. I have been baking bread with sourdough for almost, I don't even remember now, close to a decade, I'm sure. Never had a problem with it. Okay, right. Myth number 4. You shouldn't use your starter straight out of the fridge. And wow, I have really proved this one wrong, because that's the only way I use my starter. My schedule is that I feed my starter once, maybe twice a week, depending on how much I'm going to be baking. Once it gets bubbly and active, I throw it in the fridge. And I literally take my half a cup measuring cup. I go over there and I open the refrigerator door and dip it out and then put it in the recipe. I don't even get the jar out of the refrigerator. Never, ever have I had a problem. My bread always rises, always fine. So if that's something that you've been thinking, that's not true. I promise I have been making bread like this for a long, long time. I never leave my starter out, ever. Once it is fed and it gets active, it lives in the refrigerator because I do not have the resources, flour, or the time to deal with that every single day. It's too much for me. So you don't have to do that. Just put your starter in the fridge and use it until it's ready to feed again. Get it out, feed it, let it get active again, put it back in the fridge. Works like a charm. All right, the fifth and final myth is probably the biggest myth when it comes to sourdough. That baking bread is a long, drawn-out, complicated system where you feed ahead your starter, you weigh all of your ingredients, you autolyse. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. You stretch, you fold, you put it in the refrigerator overnight to do a cold rise. There's so many steps. I mean, literally, if you follow it to a T, it could take like from start to finish 3 days to make a loaf of bread. I do not have time to wait that long for a loaf of bread. I literally get either my mixer. Sometimes I don't even use my mixer. Last night I made a loaf of bread and it was my no knead. I'll link that up above. That's my most popular video. It is a easy, no knead sandwich bread recipe. Literally the easiest bread you'll ever make. And all I do is get a bowl out, put some water, some starter, some flour, some salt, some olive oil, maybe some honey. I mix it up and I leave it on the counter overnight. When I get up, it's poofed up and big. I put it in a bread pan, let it rise again for 2 or 3 hours, and I bake it off. That's it. You don't have to do all of this stuff. I have even found a recipe here on YouTube. I'll link it down in the show notes, from the Prairie Homestead, for a beautiful artisan loaf of sourdough bread that works exactly the same way. It's just water, starter, flour, salt. You mix it up the night before, you let it rise, you put it in the Banneton basket another couple hours, and you bake it off. You don't have to do all of that stuff. Take my word for it. I've been doing it a long time. Alright, so that's all I have for you today. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you found it helpful. If you're in a rut, if you started sourdough and you're like, it's just too much, I can't get this figured out, just take a breath. It is so much easier than what you think. I'm going to link a blog post down below that I wrote about this so that you can kind of go through my explanations of all this stuff and my tips and stuff like that. But if you have any questions that I didn't cover in here, if you have this thought in your head of something you wonder, do I really need to do this? Leave it down below. I'd be glad to answer your questions about it. But let's make sourdough simple again, okay? It doesn't have to be. I'm sure that our great-great-great-great-great-grandmother did not have a scale to weigh her ingredients, okay? She didn't even have a refrigerator, so it was she just made it work, and we can do the same thing too. We can do that, I promise. All right, so if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you want to head on over to our blog, it is therosehomestead.com. I have a lot of sourdough recipes and different things over there as well. So that's all I have, and I will see you on the next video.